Hey, how y'all doing? So, first things first, I don't really watch sports, so I don't watch the NBA. But this is an important topic as far as I'm concerned because it's historically important as far as I'm concerned. So, the Washington Wizards, they had some shirts made where there's a DC and there's a Black Power fist on it. So, the white photographer, I believe, for the organization, or she's an NBA photographer or whatever, this white woman designed the shirt and is online saying, "Hey, I designed this shirt. It's such a powerful message and blah blah blah. It's a Black Lives Matter type of shirt." And I saw a lot of I saw a lot of people saying you couldn't even find a black designer for your shirt, and people started laughing at it. Of course, those people, they're blackety black, so they kind of noticed that the designer for these Black Lives Matter shirts and stuff like that have been white people. And I responded that it's a white designer, black bodies, but whose message? So this goes back to the NBA not saying anything about the abuses and stuff in China. I was going to do a video about that, but I didn't want to read the long article. The long and the short of it is that the NBA started a school in China to train basketball players after the popularity of Yao Ming, and it was full of basic abuse. Young boys getting beat up, 13, 14 years old, getting beaten, getting abused. They were Uyghurs, which are the Chinese version of Muslims, which are they're not Chinese version of they're Muslims, and they're a real minority in China, and they are very much abused and misused. And you have to say to yourself, the black players are not allowed to talk about this. They're not allowed to talk about the abuses their own organization that they make money for. They're not allowed to talk about the abuses of those people. They have to talk about the made up stuff with the police and all this other shit, right? They have to follow the media narrative. So you have guys walking around with messages on their jerseys. They got it painted all over the hardwood. Whose message are they talking about here? This has nothing to do with black people. Black Lives Matter may be started by three black women, three black lesbians, by the way. But the message is 100% white. The message that the Black Lives Matter comes from is funded mostly by white people. Now, that's not a completely bad thing because when you go back in history, most organizations that have been for black people have been funded mostly by white people. But very, very rarely do you have people who take such great pleasure in being sort of the spokesman for the white view of the world and then claiming themselves to be a black power movement. But the white subversion of black power goes all the way back to the NAACP. The most of the founding members, I believe that the founding members of the NAACP, I forgot how many people it was in the group, but there was a large number of white people in that group. And this kind of explains why the NAACP has been kept relevant all of these years, because it's mostly white people that have been involved in the NAACP. It's mostly white people who fund the NAACP, and their medium was to continue hammering the courts, so they would continue to go into court. That was their thing before Martin Luther King showed up, and Martin Luther King, most of his supporters were white. Okay, there was a lot of black people who didn't support Martin Luther King. Why? Because he was a rabble rouser. He was making their lives more difficult. There was, there's a cool story, is a book called, I think it's How Harlem Killed King, or Harlem Almost Killed King, or something like that. It's on my bookshelf. But it was about a black woman who stabbed Martin Luther King before he, years before he got shot. A black woman stabbed him, saying that he was a troublemaker, and that he was causing problems and he was ruining their lives. People were getting fired and people were getting attacked and bullied and beaten up, and he was not making their lives easier. So that's just something to think about, because there's a lot of people who maybe segregation wasn't a good idea, and I don't believe that segregation was a good idea. I don't believe that anybody should tell you whether you can or cannot go somewhere. And that's the part of segregation that I disagree with, was the legal part that says you cannot go in this place, you cannot go in this place. But if somebody wants to say, I don't want to hire black people, I don't want black people in my shop, then that should have been fine. Should have just left it alone. Because black people then make their own stores. They had their own banks. They had their own theaters. They had their own hospitals. They had their own schools. They had their own shit. I've been reading. I have some books, and you could see that Black Power has always been. And you go back to what Black Power really is. It's like the Booker T. Washington concept of Black Power, which is not political, but it's more economic. Learn skills, and through skills you can maintain your income. You can create a family, and from families you can create communities. From communities you can create cities and towns, and you can have your own space. You don't really need the integration into the larger society, even if you don't want to call it the white society. You don't really need integration into that society. And if you don't believe me, just think about Chinatown. Think about the Asian areas in certain cities, like New York, for instance, and parts of California. Think about some of the Dearborn and here in the Michigan area. There's a lot of little enclaves of people who choose to live a certain way under a certain value system, and mostly they've been left alone. They can create their own. They have their own judges. Maybe they have a white mayor. Maybe they have a white city council. But it has nothing to do with the way they run their lives. They still own businesses. They leave these things to their children. Eventually, they become a little bit more politically active as as more of their children become more Americanized. They start getting involved a little bit more politically. That's where you get Rashida Tlaib, who is a congresswoman from Michigan. She's Arab. I think she might be Palestinian in some way, but you don't get that from integration. You get it from cultivating a power structure economically, where she has a bunch of people behind her who are just like her, and who are people who are somewhat independent of the political system. They own businesses. Black people in Detroit are always complaining about the Arabs own everything. Yeah, and that's how you get Rashida Tlaib as the as the congressperson from mostly black Detroit. Okay, because you get it because guess what? The Arabs own everything. So when I see stuff like this white designer, and this is just a really small thing, right? She designed some T-shirts that people then put on, and then they went out and protested. But when I see stuff like that, I say, man, it's always been that way. You're not allowed to be equally, you're quieted about certain things. You're not allowed to talk about black on black crime. You're not allowed to talk about the NBA abuses in China. You're not allowed to talk about, all of these guys. There have been so many stories about basketball players having children out of wedlock. That's another one. Not allowed to talk about a lot of the athletes that have been going broke, who leave the NBA or the NFL or whatever, and they're bankrupt within 10 years of retirement. You're not allowed to talk about that. You don't talk about that shit. You want to talk about the cops. You want to talk about how the country did you wrong. It's like the country is paying you hundreds of millions of dollars to dribble a fucking basketball. What the fuck are you talking about? Okay, so you have to ask, whose message is this? Who is this going to be benefiting? And it's not going to benefit black people. It benefits mediocre white people, because they are the ones who end up getting higher positions out of this stuff. Like when you talk, like a lot of the media today is talking about Robin DiAngelo and her book, White Fragility. There was also a black man, Ibrahim Kendi or something like that, how to be anti-racist or whatever. Robin DiAngelo's book outsells his. Robin DiAngelo was white. Ibrahim Kendi is not. He's a black man. But her book, if you go onto Twitter or whatever and just look it up, you will see that Robin DiAngelo's book is actually more popular than Abraham Kendi's. And these are the people who say things like, you're supposed to listen to black people's lived experiences. But when you look at who benefits from these situations, it's almost always white people. Almost always. Affirmative action. Who benefits from affirmative action? Not black men. White women. They benefit from affirmative action more than black men do. But you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say these things, because that's when you start losing supporters. It's okay to talk about nebulous groups like quote unquote whiteness, which is bullshit. Nobody knows what the fuck that means. Okay, it doesn't mean anything. To talk about police brutality, that's another nebulous term. It doesn't really mean anything. When you want to start talking about real substantive shit, all of a sudden people are telling you to shut up. And not just, somebody from Fox News tells LeBron James to shut up and dribble. That's not what I mean. I mean legit, I will affect your check, shut the fuck up. Because LeBron James ain't got shit to say about China. LeBron James ain't got shit to say about his fellow players not taking care of their kids. LeBron James ain't got shit to say about his fellow players going broke when they leave the league. So that should tell you there are certain things he doesn't feel comfortable discussing, despite the fact that he's got so much fucking mouth. So who's controlling him? That's my question. I'll leave you to figure out the answer. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.